I still remember the day like it was yesterday, the day that made me feel invisible, the day I realized that the people I trusted most, the ones I thought would support me no matter what, didn't even care enough to show up. It was supposed to be the biggest day of my life, my very first art show. For months, I had poured my entire soul, my time, and every ounce of money I had saved into preparing for it. I worked late into the nights after my part-time job, sketching, painting, redoing pieces until my fingers cramped and my eyes burned. I hoped that this would be the moment my family and friends would finally see me. Not just as the girl who paints for fun, but as someone chasing something real. My mom always said art was a nice hobby, but not something you build a future on. My dad called it childish and told me I'd regret not choosing a stable career. My brother joked about me ending up broke painting stick figures for pennies. My friends, they scrolled past my posts, rarely acknowledging the hours of work I shared online. But despite all that, I thought this art show would change things. I rented a small gallery space downtown. It wasn't much, it smelled faintly of old paint and the lighting was a little too harsh, but to me it felt magical. I spent weeks preparing, framing my paintings, arranging them so the story I wanted to tell flowed from wall to wall. I even designed little pamphlets with descriptions of each piece. And when the big day arrived, I was ready. I wore my nicest dress, a deep emerald green that I'd saved for special occasions. My hands shook as I set out snacks and drinks on a small table in the corner. Cheese cubes, crackers, some cheap wine I couldn't really afford but bought anyway. I imagined my family laughing together as they admired my work, maybe even telling strangers, "That's my daughter's painting." By 6 p.m., I was standing by the entrance, heart pounding, waiting. At 6:15, I told myself, they're just running late. At 6:30, I smiled nervously at the gallery owner when he asked, expecting a crowd. I laughed it off, pretending I wasn't panicking inside. By 7 p.m., my smile was cracking. My phone buzzed a few times, texts from my mom, my brother, and even one from my best friend, but none of them said I'm on my way. Instead, "Something came up, honey. Can't make it tonight. Proud of you, though. Mom. Car trouble. Sorry, sis. Good luck with your little show. Brother. Oh, God, girl, I totally forgot I had dinner plans. Next time, I swear I'll be there. Best friend. Next time. Always next time." By 7:30 p.m., the gallery was silent except for the hum of the lights. Not a single familiar face showed up. I stood there in the middle of my own exhibit, surrounded by canvases that held pieces of my heart, paintings of nights spent crying, of dreams too fragile to say out loud, of colors that screamed louder than my voice ever could. And no one cared enough to see them. My chest felt hollow. I forced myself to stand tall, but the tears burned behind my eyes. The gallery owner came over and gently asked, "Do you want to close up early?" His pity was worse than the empty room. I nodded, packed up the snacks no one touched, and walked out into the cold night air. As I dragged my box of leftover pamphlets home, one thought echoed in my head. Maybe they were right. Maybe I wasn't good enough. That night, I sat on my bedroom floor, staring at my paintings stacked against the wall. For the first time, I actually considered giving it all up, selling my supplies, throwing the canvases away, pretending I had never even tried. Because what's the point of chasing a dream if no one believes in you? But then, I looked at one canvas in particular. It was raw, unfinished, smeared with angry red strokes that I had painted after an especially bad fight with my dad. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't polished, but it was real. And something inside me whispered, "This isn't the end. Not yet." I didn't know it then, but that quiet decision to keep painting even when no one cared was the first step towards everything that came next. Because years later, that same family who ignored my art show would come crawling back, and I'd have the last laugh with $1.2 million in my hands.
The morning after my failed art show, I woke up with swollen eyes from crying and a heart that felt like stone. I expected, at the very least, some calls from my family, maybe an apology, maybe a tiny, simple, "Sorry, we missed it. How did it go?" But no one called. Instead, I got silence. When I went downstairs for breakfast, Mom was at the kitchen table scrolling on her tablet, Dad was sipping coffee and reading the news, and my brother, Jason, was busy texting on his phone. Not one of them looked up when I walked in. Finally, I broke the silence. "So, none of you came yesterday?" Mom didn't even flinch. She just said, "Sweetheart, you know we wanted to, but things happen. You can't expect us to drop everything for this." For this. Her tone made it sound like my art show was nothing more than a kid's school play, something trivial and easy to forget. Dad set down his mug and added, "Look, don't get all dramatic about it. You should be focusing on practical things anyway. How many paintings did you even sell? Any? See, this is what I mean. It's not sustainable. You're wasting your energy." Jason smirked without looking up from his phone. "Yeah, seriously, you should have just streamed it on TikTok. Maybe then someone would have cared enough to show up." The words stung more than I wanted to admit, but I forced a smile, pretending I wasn't breaking inside. "Right, thanks for the support." I grabbed a piece of toast, left the room, and locked myself in my bedroom before the tears spilled again. That day was a turning point for me. I realized something important. I couldn't keep waiting for their approval. They weren't going to give it. Ever. If I wanted to prove them wrong, I'd have to do it without them. The next few months weren't easy. I worked 2 jobs, one at a local coffee shop, another freelancing online, just to afford rent and buy art supplies. Most nights, I came home exhausted, my feet aching and my eyes heavy, but no matter how tired I was, I always carved out at least an hour to paint. Some nights, I'd set up a canvas in my tiny kitchen, mixing colors on cheap plates, the smell of acrylic filling the air. Other nights, I'd sketch on scraps of paper while sitting on my bed, headphones in, blocking out the sound of my parents downstairs complaining about bills or criticizing my choices. I poured all my frustration into those paintings. Every dismissive comment, every joke about me being a starving artist, every time they told me I'd never make it. All of it turned into brushstrokes. I painted raw emotions, shadows of faceless figures, bursts of chaotic color, stormy skies clashing with fragile flowers. My work wasn't pretty in the traditional sense, but it was powerful. It was honest. And slowly, something shifted inside me. I stopped painting for them. I stopped painting for anyone else. I painted for me. But of course, my family still found ways to mock me. One evening, Mom walked into my room uninvited while I was working on a large canvas. "Honestly, sweetheart," she said, shaking her head, "why didn't you at least paint something people want to buy? You know, landscapes, cute animals, pretty flowers. That dark, messy stuff isn't going to hang in anyone's living room." Jason chimed in from the hallway. "She should paint clowns. At least then she'd be painting what she already is." He burst out laughing at his own joke. Dad's favorite line became, "How's your little art hobby going? Any millionaire buyers yet?" I wanted to scream. But instead, I just clenched my jaw and kept painting because deep down, I started to realize that their mockery wasn't really about me. It was about them. They couldn't see beyond their own narrow definition of success. To them, success meant a corporate job, a stable paycheck, a predictable life. My pursuit of art, something uncertain, unconventional, threatened that worldview. It scared them. So they belittled it. But I wasn't going to let their fear dictate my future. Then, something unexpected happened. I started sharing my work online again. Not for likes, not for validation, just to put it out there. Instagram, Twitter, even Reddit. At first, nothing. A few pity likes, the occasional cool painting. But then one of my posts went viral. It was a photo of a piece I called Silent Room. It was inspired by that night in the gallery, the emptiness, the loneliness, the sound of buzzing lights. The painting showed an empty chair in the middle of a vast, shadowy room, with faint, ghost-like figures fading into the walls. People connected with it. Hundreds of comments poured in. This feels like my childhood. I can't explain it, but this hits me in the chest. Where can I buy prints? For the first time, strangers, complete strangers, saw me. And it felt like oxygen after years of suffocation. I started selling small prints online. At first, maybe $20 here, $50 there, enough to buy more paint, maybe pay a utility bill. But slowly, the orders grew. People wanted commissions. They wanted custom pieces. They wanted me. I didn't tell my family about it at first, but they noticed when I started coming home with better groceries, when I bought myself a decent laptop, when I upgraded from painting on scraps of cardboard to large canvases. One night at dinner, Jason smirked and said, "So what's with all the fancy stuff? Did someone finally pay you to stop painting?" Mom gave me a suspicious look. "You're not borrowing money from anyone, are you?" Dad frowned. "You better not be in debt." I smiled, just a little. "Nope, I'm just figuring things out." They didn't press further, and I didn't offer details. Not yet. Because I wanted them to underestimate me. I wanted them to keep thinking I was small. Because one day, the truth would blow their minds. And they'd remember the night they didn't show up for me. The night they let me down.
When my first print orders shipped out, I thought it was just a fluke. Maybe people bought them out of pity or because the post was trending. I told myself, "Don't get your hopes up, Clara. This will fade just like everything else." But it didn't fade. A week later, more orders came in. Then more. People weren't just buying my prints. They were tagging me in photos of them hanging in their homes, in their bedrooms, even in offices. Seeing my art, my pain, become a part of other people's spaces felt unreal. One message in particular stuck with me. A woman from Canada wrote, "Your piece, Silent Room, made me cry. It feels exactly like how I felt growing up invisible in my family. Thank you for painting what I couldn't put into words." That one message, it was like fuel. It reminded me that maybe, just maybe, my art wasn't meaningless. Maybe I had something to say, and the world was finally ready to listen. But of course, my family still didn't see it. One evening, while I was packaging prints in the living room, Jason walked in, took one look at the bubble mailers, and burst out laughing. "What is this? An Etsy store? Oh my God, Clara, you're turning into one of those craft moms. Should I call you Etsy Queen now?" I gritted my teeth and didn't respond. Dad from the couch glanced at the stack of envelopes. "So what? You're really wasting your time selling posters for pocket change? You'd make more money babysitting." Mom added, "You know, sweetheart, if you just listened to us and get a real job, you wouldn't have to hustle like this. It's embarrassing." Embarrassing. That word echoed in my mind. But instead of breaking me, it hardened me because I knew the truth. They didn't understand what I was building. I didn't need them to. Every night after work, I doubled down. I learned how to photograph my art better, how to market online, how to connect with people authentically. I joined online communities of artists who were struggling just like me, artists who knew the sting of being overlooked. And little by little, the community grew. My follower count climbed into the thousands, my DMs filled with commission requests. But then came my first real test. I was invited to submit a piece to a regional art competition. Nothing huge, just a local showcase. But for me, it was massive. I chose to submit Silent Room, the piece that started everything. When I told my family about it, I expected at least a shred of pride. Maybe, "Good job, Clara." Maybe, "We'll come support you." Instead, Jason snorted. "Oh, great, another art show. Remember the last one? Empty seats. Can't wait for round 2. Dad from the couch glanced at the stack of envelopes. "So what? You're really wasting your time selling posters for pocket change? You'd make more money babysitting." Mom added, "You know, sweetheart, if you just listened to us and get a real job, you wouldn't have to hustle like this. It's embarrassing." Embarrassing. That word echoed in my mind. But instead of breaking me, it hardened me. Because I knew the truth. They didn't understand what I was building. I didn't need them to. The night after work, I doubled down. I learned how to photograph my art better, how to market online, how to connect with people authentically. I joined online communities of artists who were struggling just like me, artists who knew the sting of being overlooked. And little by little, the community grew. My follower count climbed into the thousands, my DMs filled with commission requests. But then came my first real test. I was invited to submit a piece to a regional art competition. Nothing huge, just a local showcase, but for me, it was massive. I chose to submit Silent Room, the piece that started everything. When I told my family about it, I expected at least a shred of pride. Maybe, "Good job, Clara." Maybe, "We'll come support you." Instead, Jason snorted. "Oh, great, another art show. Remember the last one? Empty seats. Can't wait for round 2. Dad from the couch sighed. "Don't set yourself up for disappointment again. Just be realistic." Mom gave me a tight smile. "Sweetheart, if it doesn't work out, promise me you won't take it too hard." That night, I cried in bed again. But the difference was that this time I wasn't crying out of hopelessness. I was crying because I knew I'd proved them wrong. The night of the competition, I stood nervously in the gallery, surrounded by other artists and spectators. My palms were sweaty, my throat dry. I glanced around, hoping maybe, just maybe, my family had shown up this time. They didn't. Of course they didn't. But something unexpected happened. People I had never met walked up to my piece and stayed there. They lingered. They tilted their heads, leaned closer, whispered to each other. One man, gray hair, sharp suit, expensive-looking shoes, stood in front of Silent Room for nearly 10 minutes. Finally, he turned to me and asked, "Are you the artist?" I nodded, my heart pounding. "This," he gestured to the painting, "feels alive. It's haunting. I'd like to talk to you about a possible feature." I nearly fainted. The man introduced himself as David Klein, a curator for a mid-sized gallery in the city. He gave me his card and told me to call him the next week. I tucked that card into my pocket like it was solid gold. When I got home and told my family about it, their reactions were exactly what you'd expect. Jason rolled his eyes. "Oh, wow, some random old dude liked your depressing painting. Big deal." Dad scoffed. "Don't set yourself up for disappointment again, just be realistic." Mom just sighed. "Well, I guess we'll see, but don't start celebrating yet." They couldn't even pretend to be happy for me. And that's when I realized something that cut deeper than anything else. It wasn't that they didn't believe in me, it was that they didn't want to. Because if I succeeded, it would mean they were wrong. And they couldn't stand that. The following week, I met with David at his gallery. I was so nervous I could barely speak, but he was kind, patient, and genuinely excited about my work. He explained that he wanted to feature Silent Room in a small upcoming exhibition focused on emerging voices in modern art. It wouldn't pay much, just a stipend to cover transportation and display costs, but it was exposure, real exposure. I agreed immediately. The night of the exhibition, the gallery was buzzing with collectors, critics, and other artists. For the first time, I felt like I belonged. People stopped to look at my work, asked me questions, even asked for my contact information. I didn't win any prizes that night, but I walked away with something more valuable: validation. A sense that maybe, just maybe, my art had a place in the world. Meanwhile, back at home, the divide between me and my family grew. Jason got a new car for his birthday, funded by my parents. They threw him a big party, invited relatives, posted about it all over Facebook. Me? They barely acknowledged my gallery exhibition. One night I overheard Dad talking to Mom in the kitchen. I don't know why she wastes her time. She's never going to make a living off this. Jason is our real hope. Our real hope. I sat in my room, fists clenched, teeth grinding, but instead of breaking me, their words became fuel. Because I knew something they didn't. The world was starting to notice me. And one day, they wouldn't be able to ignore me anymore.
The weeks after the gallery show felt like living in two different worlds. In one world, the gallery world, I was finally starting to breathe. My art had been seen, not by thousands, but by enough people who mattered. I got emails from collectors asking if I had more work available. A blogger wrote a small piece about Silent Room, calling it a visceral portrayal of solitude that demands attention. In the other world, my family's world, I was still the joke. Jason joked at dinner about how I was riding the pity train. Dad muttered about me wasting electricity in my room while painting. Mom just asked, every other day, "Have you applied to any real jobs yet?" It was suffocating. But something inside me had changed. Their words didn't cut as deep anymore. Because for the first time, I wasn't relying on them for validation. I was getting it from people who saw me, who understood what I was trying to say. One night, David, the curator, called me. His voice was calm, almost too casual, as he said, "Clara, I have an opportunity for you. A major exhibition downtown. It's juried, and competition is steep, but I believe one of your pieces belongs there." My heart stopped. "Which piece?" I asked. "Not Silent Room," he said. "Something new. Something that feels like where you are now." The words lodged in my chest. Where I am now. And suddenly, I knew exactly what I had to paint. For the next 2 months, I poured everything into a single canvas. I locked myself in my studio until dawn, paint-stained and exhausted, but driven like never before. The piece I created was unlike anything I'd done before. Dark, yes, but also alive. It was a swirl of despair and defiance, of isolation and resilience. The centerpiece was a faceless figure standing in a crowd, every person around them blurred and indistinct. Above, a single harsh spotlight illuminated the figure, not out of admiration, but interrogation, as if the world was staring, judging, refusing to understand. I called it Unseen. When it was finished, I stepped back and cried, not out of sadness, but out of release. Every wound, every slight, every dismissal from my family was on that canvas. The exhibition night arrived. The venue was massive, walls lined with works from artists far more accomplished than me. My hands shook as I hung unseen on the wall, feeling like a fraud. As the crowd poured in, I prepared myself for the worst. Polite glances, quick dismissals, nothing more. But that's not what happened. People stopped. They stayed. They whispered. A woman in an emerald dress actually wept in front of my piece. A group of college students took selfies in front of it, tagging my name. Critics scribbled notes in their pads. And then, it happened. The bidding opened. I didn't even realize my piece was part of the auction until David nudged me. He whispered, "Just watch." The first bid came at $10,000. My jaw dropped. Then $20,000. $50,000. A man in a sleek black suit raised his paddle calmly, his face unreadable. Across the room, a woman countered with $75,000. The numbers climbed: $100,000, $250,000, $400,000, until I could barely process what I was hearing. My ears buzzed, my heart pounded. Finally, after a tense back and forth, the black-suited man lifted his paddle one last time. $1.2 million. The room gasped. The gavel came down. Sold. I stood there frozen, staring at the canvas as though it had transformed into a stranger. Unseen, the piece born of my pain, my invisibility, my rejection, had just sold for more money than I had ever imagined in my lifetime. My hands shook so violently I nearly dropped my champagne glass. David put a steady hand on my shoulder. "Clara," he said softly, "you just became an artist people will remember." The next morning, the news spread online. Blogs wrote about me. Local TV stations covered the sale. My inbox exploded with offers from galleries, collectors, and agents. But the message that hit hardest was the one from my family group chat. "Jason, wait, what? Your painting sold for $1 million? Mom, sweetheart, why didn't you tell us this was happening? We would have come to support you." Dad, "We're so proud of you. This is incredible. You should come over for dinner so we can celebrate as a family." I stared at the screen, numb. Now they wanted to celebrate? Now they were proud? Where were they when I stood alone in that empty art show? Where were they when I cried in my hospital bed? Where were they when every word out of their mouths was meant to cut me down? They hadn't changed. They just smelled money. That night, I sat alone in my tiny studio apartment, sipping cheap wine out of a chipped mug. My phone buzzed constantly from messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. Suddenly, everyone wanted to be a part of my life again. But for the first time, I didn't feel desperate for their approval, because I finally understood something that had taken me years to learn. I didn't need them. I never did. Still, part of me wanted them to feel the weight of what they'd done. So when Mom called the next day, her voice syrupy sweet, saying, "Sweetheart, why don't you bring your new painting profits over? Your father and I could help you manage it, keep it safe for you." I laughed. Out loud. For the first time in my life, I laughed at her. "No, Mom, you don't get to touch a single cent. You don't get to be part of this. You didn't come to my art show. You didn't believe in me. You left me alone. And now I'm finally free of you." She sputtered, tried to recover. "Clara, don't be ridiculous. We're family." "No," I cut her off. "Family shows up. Family supports you. You made it clear a long time ago I wasn't part of yours. So don't call me now just because I proved you wrong." And then, for the first time ever, I hung up on my mother. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding with both fear and exhilaration. I wasn't just an artist anymore. I was an artist who had finally been seen. And the people who had ignored me the most, the ones whose approval I once begged for, were now the ones begging at my door, and I wasn't letting them in. The morning after I hung up on my mom, I woke to a silence I hadn't felt in years. Not the silence of loneliness, the silence of peace. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty for saying no. I didn't feel like a burden. I didn't feel like the unwanted daughter trying to earn her family's scraps of affection. I felt free. With the money from the sale, I didn't rush into buying designer clothes or flashy cars. Instead, I poured it into the one thing that had never abandoned me: my art. I upgraded from my tiny studio apartment to a loft with wide windows and white walls that seemed to beg for paint. I bought better supplies, canvases taller than me, brushes fine enough to catch every flicker of emotion. And then I worked. For months, I painted like someone possessed. Each stroke felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been taken. I painted rage, I painted grief, I painted hope. And as the paintings piled up, so did the invitations. Galleries from New York, Paris, even Tokyo wanted to feature my work. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was building a name. But success had an odd side effect. My family's desperation grew louder. Mom called again. "Sweetheart, we just want to fix things. Let's have dinner, just us." Dad sent me long texts about how he always knew I was special. Jason even had the audacity to message me, "Hey, think you could loan me $20K for a down payment? We're family, right?" Every time, I ignored them. Because deep down, I knew the truth. They didn't want me, they wanted what I had built. They hadn't shown up when I needed them most, and that was all I needed to remember. The world, however, did show up. One night, I walked into a crowded gallery in Paris, and strangers called my name. Critics shook my hand. A woman leaned close and whispered, "Your work saved me during a dark time." I thought back to the Christmas I spent crying in my room, the hospital bed where no one visited, the empty gallery where my family's absence cut sharper than any knife. And I realized something. The love I had begged for from my family, I was finally receiving from people who truly understood me, not because they had to, not because of blood, but because they chose to. Months later, when I returned home for a short trip, I bumped into Jason at a cafe. He looked surprised to see me. His clothes were rumpled, his eyes tired. "So, big shot now, huh?" he said, forcing a laugh. I just smiled. Something like that. He hesitated, then said, "Listen, about the way we treated you, we didn't mean it, we didn't get it." I looked at him for a long moment, remembering every cruel joke, every time he dismissed me as a failure. I said, "Maybe you didn't mean it, but you still did it." And with that, I walked away. The old Clara would have crumbled. She would have begged for forgiveness, begged to belong. But the new Clara, she didn't need them anymore. The years rolled forward, and with every exhibition, every article, every award, I felt the gap between me and my family grow wider, not because I was running from them, but because they had chosen to stand still. They had laughed when I gave them socks at Christmas. They had rolled their eyes when I spent nights in the hospital bed alone. They had ignored the invitations to my art shows. And now, as they scrolled through headlines of my painting selling for sums they couldn't dream of, I hoped they realized something. The burden they cast aside had become the only person they could never catch up to. Sometimes when I paint late at night in my loft, I think about that first gallery show. The empty seats, the silence. It still stings. But then I remembered the moment the gavel fell at 1.2 million, the tears in strangers' eyes as they looked at my work, the whispers of genius and visionary from people who had no reason to flatter me. And I smile, because in the end, my family's absence gave me something priceless, the strength to build a life where their presence wasn't required. Now when I stand before a canvas, I don't paint for them, I don't paint for revenge. I paint for me, for the girl who once sat in her bedroom with a sketch pad, praying someone would notice her, for the woman who turned her pain into art worth millions, for the artist who finally knows she was never invisible, just waiting to be seen by the right eyes. And when I look around at the world I've built, the freedom I've earned, the love I've found in the unexpected corners, I think one thing, over and over. They never came to my art show, but now they'll never stop seeing my name